watching some Mid-Atlantic from 1981 and 1982, I find that I really enjoy Sandy Scott as an authority figure. In Jim's opinion, who are some of the best and worst on-screen authority figures in wrestling?
Well, I'll take some comment on Sandy. Sandy was good because usually an ex-wrestler, it needs to be featured as more of an on-air personality because they have a strong personality. Bullet Bob Armstrong being the commissioner, etc. But Sandy was not the guy that ran everything. It was just noted that Sandy was a wrestler who had retired and gone into promotion. And in his towns of Roanoke, and then after Johnny Weaver, he took over Greenville, South Carolina, and the fans all knew that, there's Sandy, the promoter, but he had been retired long enough that he had more promoter and office guy in him than wrestler. So he didn't come out and he wasn't chewing up the scenery because Sandy was Canadian and kind of had that reserved personality. He had a dry wit. He was funny, but he wasn't over the top. He wasn't going to come out there and cut Bullet Bob's promo. So he was easy to buy as a guy that could be, an authority figure in the office without being a gimmick. You see what I'm saying? Does that make any sense?
Sure.
And at the same time, he could lay the law down pretty good because people knew he could kind of handle himself from those days. As far as bad and good authority figures, God, there's been great authority figures in terms of whether it was Bill Watts as president of Mid-South Sports or whether it was Bullet Bob Armstrong as commissioner of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. In his own way and because of his iconism, is that a word? Iconic status in the Memphis territory, Eddie Marlin was a good authority figure because Eddie was more, it used to be a rib or a joke in the heel locker room. Every time Eddie would run out on Memphis TV and get knocked on his ass, his shirt would fly up. He'd have that pullover collared, like knit, like he's on the golf course shirt on. And and his shirt would fly up and you'd see a package of Red Man tobacco in his back pocket. The people liked him because he was one of them. Everybody knew Eddie Marlin been a wrestler for years. Now he's a good old Tennessee boy that's the promoter. Jerry Jarrett didn't come out that much. You couldn't really call Jerry Jarrett an authority figure because he was only involved in important angles where they would acknowledge that he was the kind of the head guy. And then he'd go away from TV for quite a while. I never got Jack Tunney as an authority figure, except that, it was the Tunneys in Toronto and he looked good in a suit because he made a fucking freaking fortune from that company. So he wore those $1,000 suits. But, Gorilla Monsoon to me was better in that role in that company because he could come out and do angles and sparingly. But, it meant something when Vader bombed him because he didn't do that a lot the last 10 years of his life. So, you're the great or the bad authority figures. It depends on your area of the country and the promotion that you were watching at the time. In modern days, the only authority figures there really have been that meant anything was the McMahon family. I was an authority figure in TNA, but that's like being the nicest guy in prison. I liked the executive producer bit in Ring of Honor was a little bit different way of doing it. But unless you have a wrestling legend that you can bring back and sell tickets to see or sell pay-per-views or whatever your manner of monetization is these days, unless you can get some interest and ratings, etc. I almost think it would be better if the guys could cut their own promos. Because I didn't want to be on Ring of Honor. I didn't want to be running from the goddamn TV truck in 100-degree Baltimore weather 100 yards into the ring and be blown up to do a 4-minute interview and then run back to fucking continue. But at that point, there wasn't a lot of the guys that had a lot of experience explaining stipulations, big match signings, cutting their own promos, etc. And, it's almost the point, if you've got guys that can talk, why don't we try it without an authority figure every once in a while, especially a heel one. And then slowly, as you might need someone to represent the promotion, put in a babyface voice and try to break the fucking, heel authority figure bullshit. Because because it's like everything else at this point. It's been so overdone that they just does SmackDown and Raw need the general manager thing, or because as I don't watch the show, I don't know how heavily featured they are.
No, of course not. But I mean, that's kind of the thing, when people bring up the authority figure, there really was never that role. I mean, Bill Watts really wasn't the authority figure on Mid-South TV. Like, when you came to WCW, you kind of had that role. He was the boss. But in Mid-South TV, you knew he was, if you were just a casual fan, you knew he had something to do with the company, but you didn't know exactly what.
Yeah, well, they acknowledged he was the president of Mid-South Sports, but then also he would even defer in his authority sometimes to NWA rulings when, early on, or then just, some type of ruling from the Athletic Commission to make it look, when something was out of his hands.
Right.
Or who was it? Who do you always use in Tampa? Charlie Lay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Bob
Geigel was terrible whenever he was used in that kind of role.
Oh God. Okay. Thank you for bringing that up. And a tremendous wrestler in his day, which was the 50s, horrible authority, stumble bum authority figure in the 80s. But that's. The whole idea was always to give some legitimacy when the local promotion is trying to get the champion, then the NWA can become the heel and make rulings from outside the territory. Or just as somebody to be able to sign a match and announce a match, because guys didn't used to be able to just say, okay, I'll fight you. Well, I'll fight you, and then jump in the ring and do it. It had to be cleared you can't just start a fucking your own basketball game on the sidelines of a basketball game. Right? So there had to be some logic to it. So there was always somebody to say, even if the announcer just had to say, we got to go to a break and get word from the promoter in the back. And then you go behind the curtain and come back. Yeah, they signed it. But something, right? An effort had to be made. And so there always needed to be somebody recognized as a promoter's representative or whatever. I mean, back in the days when Gulas Welch Wrestling out of Nashville had literally 5 or 6 weekly different TV shows, because they did TV in Nashville and in Chattanooga and in Birmingham and in Huntsville and in Memphis. And at one point they did one in Louisville for, as we said in my book, Tuesday Night at the Gardens, for 6 or 9 months. So the fans knew that the promoter couldn't be in every goddamn spot that they saw on TV, couldn't be everywhere. And in Louisville, we never saw Nick Gulas, except on TV. But there would always be some. I remember they used, I think in Nashville, they used Danny Dusick, because he was an old retired wrestler that actually basically guarded the door and, fucking helped around the promotion. And so, yeah, but he was the representative of the office. He'd okay a match or whatever the fuck. But, when it was presented as a shoot, there had to be some authority, but they didn't nose in unless it was, like Nick did quite often, because he was the big boss and he loved to be on TV. But it was never a featured integral part of every weekly show until it worked for Vince.
Now, with Vince, obviously, it was a game-changing thing for him, and there hadn't been too many heel authority figures. I mean, Tom Ernesto in '85 in Memphis. But when he did it, it was revolutionary.
And I don't remember that working out too well either, do you?
Well, it had a memorable angle, but overall, I wouldn't say it worked out that well. But with Vince, it was so different having a heel authority figure. At what point do you stop doing that? Because you have to get back to the way wrestling works, which is the wrestlers are crazy, but the actual foundation, the promotion they work for, is stable.
Yeah.
As opposed to, there are maniacs running the company, and the wrestlers have to deal with this.
Yeah. You know what? The switch, that simple a switch from we're honest, God-fearing business people trying to be fair and run this promotion with these crazy outlaw, out-of-control wrestlers, to the people that run the company are maniacs that all the wrestlers have to try to rise up against. Maybe why none of the fucking wrestlers get over anymore. Because it's the complete reversal of the whole logic of all of wrestling since the beginning of time. And when should it have been, when Vince quit doing it, or when Vince originally ran his course, the kids should have been fucking somehow babyface to bring it back. And then maybe the kids could have switched heel. But 20 years of an evil empire, and then everybody else has to copy it, because like we've said many times, since Vince was an incredible performer and it was so real life, it worked. And then they've tried to fake real life ever since. And it just, and I guess that's the one good thing about nobody wanting wrestling to even make any sense anymore, is that nobody examines why, if fucking Vince and the McMahons are the evil empire, why should we give them our money to go see the show where they hold our favorite wrestlers down? But it doesn't need to make that much sense anymore, because nobody cares.